Hello, Karen.
Hello, welcome
Hi,
everybody
Ron.
to the class that shall not be named, sorry, the Wednesday class that shall not be named. As we're here first time in 2025, let's see, and so excited to start studying together again because of the holidays. There are some Wednesdays we missed, but I don't know if we're going to be missing any Wednesdays, or at least I won't for the foreseeable future. So welcome everybody. So thrilled to have people here. We've got Michael and Lou and Arlene and Ron and Stuart and Karen and of course David. David is coming from England, Stuart from space, and high velocity. So we have people on from 2 states, 2 countries, and one in outer space. So we're doing pretty good. He's going to share some really insight. So what we're going to do, I think, for the next couple weeks is talk a little bit about the Bible and some things we might want to know in the Bible. And today we'll talk a little bit about the generalities of how to find stuff in the Bible and how the Bible works. I'm getting a phone call here. Let me just double check that it's not somebody. It's not. Who was having trouble getting on. So what we're going to do here, there's a couple places. If you ever want to get a good Bible online, probably the best one is something called the Accordance. It's really not very expensive. Let me share it. Just let me share.
Yep.
So this is, now we're not going to be using it today because I'm not as good with it as I have said. So if you look at it in Accordance, you can come right here and it'll have Hebrew and in English. It goes word by word. It's great.
It's formed up. They're working.
And so that's a nice one to use. And then you can go up here and you can find, do bookmarks and do all this cool stuff. And if you want to look at individual books, you can do that. If you can go to the library and have all these things. You can have all the commentaries. So it's really cool to use this. We're going to use something that's even easier. You go online and you want a Hebrew Bible online for free. You go to this one right here, Machon Mamre. Now the translations are very old. They use masculine for God and that kind of stuff, but it's really accessible. You can see here is the Torah and the prophets. So let's look at what the Bible is first of all, and then I'll teach you some tricks as to how to find stuff in the Bible. So the Bible is called the Tanakh. Have we done this before? Not in years, probably, right?
No, I don't think we ever did.
Okay. So the Tanakh is the Bible. So what is the Tanakh? The Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. So I'll unshare this, and I'll show you something else for what you get to another place. And then I'll show you kind of in a simplified form. Give me 1 second. So now, you see this here. This is the Tanakh. So the Tanakh, as you can see, is just the word Tanakh is an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. When the K goes at the end, it becomes a Cha. So you can say Tanakh or you can say Tanakh. And that is the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, the Jewish Bible, however you want to call it. So it's basically just 3 sections. The first section is, of course, Torah, which is obviously the most important section. So there's the 5 books here. The next section is prophets.
Are you showing something?
You see it? Can you guys see it?
I can.
I can't.
Who cannot see it? I'm sharing screen, so if I'm not doing it correctly, let me know. Michael, can you see what I'm sharing? Ron, Karen, can you see it?
I can.
We can see it, but it's
small.
It's very small.
Change the view to make what I'm showing you bigger.
Right. It's your view. Yeah, I can see it very large.
Me too.
Me
So
too.
3 sections are Torah, prophets, and writings. Now, we know what the Torah is. That's easy. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. The Deuteronomy goes right into the next book. So Deuteronomy will go straight into Joshua. So it's a continual. I have somebody who wants to come. Arnold, if you're watching, you're coming in on 3 different ones. So let's make sure. Make sure I'm admitted all 3 of you. So hopefully it'll work out. If not, I'll help you fix that. So the Torah goes from Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Moses dies in Deuteronomy. We go straight to Joshua. And then it's a continuation all the way to right here. So the Bible starts off with a continual story from Genesis through Kings 2. That's from the creation of the world to the destruction of the first temple. So that is all of that. So it makes it easy if you are reading it, you know you're going to get a thorough, straight line from Genesis all the way to Kings 2. And again, we'll talk about that as we go along. The next 3 right here are called, what they're called?
Major prophets.
Major prophets. Good job. They're the major prophets. Does anybody know why they're called the major prophets? It's a really simple answer. Because their books are longer. Basically the reason. They have long books, whereas the next ones are really short. So the 3 major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, these are 3 major prophetic books. Elijah's a major prophet. Moses is a major prophet. They don't have their own books, though. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel are basically in chronological order as well. But they overlap. These 3 overlap some of it with this over here. So these are the 3 separate orders, but they're chronologically in order as well. And then you have the minor prophets. And can anybody guess why they're called the minor prophets?
Books are shorter.
Books are shorter, exactly. So these are the minor prophets, and these 12 are also in chronological order on their own. They overlap with the 3 major ones, and they overlap with some of the books that are in the Kings 1 as well. So some of these books are really short. Which one is it? I think Obadiah is 1 chapter, I think. So when you see this, we realize the last confirmed prophet of Judaism is who? Is Malachi. Malachi is the last prophet, somewhere probably in the 5th century BCE. So that's prophecy officially ends from this perspective. So we have 15 prophetic books, but we have more prophets than this, obviously. Elijah, Elisha, Moses, there's some others, but these are the ones with their own books, guys. So this is the Torah and Nevi'im. Now, if when we go to Saturday services, we read from something called the Haftorah. The Haftorah doesn't mean half Torah, it means additional. The Haftorah has to come from here. These books, that's the Haftorah, has to come from here. Now, the most often used book in the Haftorah, by far, and it's not even close, is Isaiah. Isaiah is used all the time as the Haftorah. Not the only one, but by far the most. Because really, he's the most famous of all the prophets who have books. So that's the first 2. So even though it's called prophets, the first 6 books are the continual history coming from the Torah. Some people believe that these books, these 4, and these make up a continual story, that they may have some connection to each other. Genesis is kind of like a precursor or prequel, kind of like The Hobbit to The Lord of the Rings. So this is part of the Deuteronomical hypothesis that these were written by different people, but connecting them through the ages. Now, for the last section, which is Ketuvim, the Ka, it's just everything else. We have wisdom literature. We have, these are books that are called Megillot, that are the books that are on scrolls that are read at certain holidays. Most famously, of course, is Esther, because we have a holiday based only on that book. It's the only book in which a holiday is based on it completely. Ruth is very famous, obviously, for coming from in the holiday of Shavuos. Shavuos is not based on just that book. And then the last three, basically, so we have the wisdom literature, the books in the Megillot, and the last three are kind of things that don't fit anywhere else. Daniel, is he a prophet? Is he not a prophet? He's not really fit, doesn't really fit into the prophetic world as much. Ezra and Nehemiah, which tell the story of Ezra and Nehemiah coming down and kind of restarting Judaism, and Chronicles 1 and 2, which are a retelling of the story of David. So this is the Bible. We're going to look at this over the next couple weeks, Stuart.
Who canonized Ketuvim?
Now, that is a very good question. We have no proof that is beyond reproach, I guess. We don't know who canonized it for sure, but we have a very good guess. The guess is that after the destruction of the temple, around 70 CE, a man named Yochanan ben Zakkai started an academy in a place called Yavneh in Israel. And they believe that sometime, I mean, there may be other theories, but this is the one, sometime around 90 CE, Common Era. And if you want to know what the difference between CE and AD is, AD and CE are different letters. That's the only difference. It's the same thing. Because we don't want to do it the same as the Christians, so we have our own way of saying it. So BC, before Christ, we say before Common Era. That's the only difference. So 90, these rabbis got together and they decided which books would go in and which books would not go in this canonized. Now, was this decision made? Did people already know? Were they already reading the Bible? We know the Bible, or at least all of these books, we know except for this book, we have in Hebrew before the year 90. So we know all of these books except for Esther were written in Hebrew before the year 90. How do we know this? What famous batch of scrolls proves this?
The Dead Sea Scrolls?
The Dead Sea Scrolls prove that all of these books, except for Esther, were written in Hebrew before the year 90. Now, we don't have a complete scroll of any of the books. Isaiah, I think, is pretty close. We have close to complete of some. So we have pieces of all of these books. So we know in 90, they had all of these books in Hebrew, except we can't prove they have Esther. I think we can pretty much say they probably did because it made it in. We also know that some books did not get in. Most famously, the book of the Maccabees. I'm going to spell this wrong on purpose. Why? Because I am lying and I don't know how to spell Maccabees. But the Maccabees, some other books didn't make it in. So they had books that they put in. The books that did not make it in are called the Apocrypha. They are used for historical purposes, but they are not considered canon.
Rabbi?
Yes, Flossie.
2 questions. One, how did someone become a prophet, and what does a prophet do?
Great question. We're going to talk about this later, but I'll answer it now because it's such a great question. There are different sorts of prophets, and basically Moses is a prophet unto himself, and most of the prophets can be categorized as prophets in one category. Moses and some of the people maybe in Genesis, like Abraham, had some sort of connection to God that was beyond the other prophets. A direct communication while they are awake. A talking communication, like I am talking to you, but not that way. Obviously, we don't know how God communicates to us. Is it in the mind? Is it a feeling? But there is a give and take between Moses and God. There's a give and take between Abraham and God. The prophets here receive their information via dreams, usually, or feelings. So they are lesser prophets than Moses. That doesn't mean they're lesser people, just means Moses is on high. So they get theirs through dreams and more directions, or maybe angels at some point, but they don't have this give and take talk with God that we find. So how are they chosen is one of the great mysteries of all time. We do not know how they're chosen. These are people who are, let me stop sharing here for a second. These are people who are chosen for seemingly random reasons. Some are younger, some are older, some are educated, some are less educated, some are wealthy, some are poor, some live in Israel, the northern kingdom, some live in Judah, the southern kingdom. So we don't know why they're chosen, but they are. So that is, there's a lot of debate as to why they're chosen. Obviously, God knows something about them, but we don't. So they are all extraordinary people. They're all the prophetic books are male. So all of these, the 3 major, the 12 minor, are all men. There are a couple of women who are labeled prophets. They don't have their own books. One of them might be, and again, if they're labeled prophets in the Torah, it's rare. So Deborah, Miriam, and a woman named Huldah are the women who are labeled prophet or prophetess. Huldah is a strange character who has just basically says that the book in Kings 2, she basically says the book of Deuteronomy is legitimate. Miriam, we know who Miriam is. She's in the book of Exodus through Numbers. And Deborah is one of the judges. So those are the women who are labeled as prophets, but they don't have a lot of screen time, even though they're prophets. They don't. Even Miriam barely speaks. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how you can find stuff in the Torah. So we're going to do that. So in the Torah, we have these 5 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So if we go to Exodus, what is the beginning of Exodus?
Creation.
I'm sorry, beginning of Genesis, my bad.
Genesis, yeah.
The beginning of creation. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Now the earth was unformed. So this we know is the start. So everybody knows chapter 1, verse 1 of the Torah of Genesis is in the beginning, Bereshit. And then we go through, of course, the book itself. So if you go to Genesis, and let's pick another chapter. Let's go to pick another chapter. Let's pick chapter 2. Continues the creation. Chapter 3, we go in the creation story. It's Adam and Eve. So Genesis is a prequel. It is the story of everybody who comes before Moses. So everybody in Genesis comes before Moses. If we randomly pick a chapter, we've got Sarah and Abraham. We go a little bit later, we're going to have Rebecca and Isaac. We go a little bit later. We're going to have, we'll go a little bit before this. 32. We go to 32. We'll have Jacob and Esau. And then if we go a little bit past it, we've got story of Joseph. Start 33. Actually, that was 34, 30. That's Dina. And then we come to find 1 second, go to 33. 35. So in 35, we'll start having Joseph being born. So creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, and the matriarchs and patriarchs, that's all that's in the Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, going through Joseph. What is the longest story in Genesis? It's the story of Joseph. So Joseph is the longest story, longest continual story, longest story overall, basically from chapter 36. 37, sorry, 37. From chapter 37 through chapter 50, it's the story of Joseph. So Joseph is about a third of the book. So how does Genesis end? Who dies at the end of Genesis?
Moses.
On Genesis. At the end of Genesis, so Joseph died being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. That is the end of Genesis. So you know, anybody who comes before Joseph is going to be in the book of Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah. Any of those really strange and interesting stories like Noah, like Lot, like Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, that is all in Genesis. And so Joseph died at the end of Genesis. What book comes next?
Exodus.
Exodus. So we go to Exodus. Let's go to Exodus chapter 1. Exodus chapter 1 is the transition between Genesis. It's like they wrote a whole book and said, wait a minute, we need something to connect Genesis to Exodus. Let's put the very first chapter. These are the names of the sons of Israel came into Egypt. Reuben's, what are these people? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. These are the
12 tribes.
12
Tribes.
That's right, the 12 brothers.
And the sons of Jacob, right?
Right. And Joseph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's who went into Egypt. And Joseph died, and all his generation were fruitful and increased. Oops, that was badly written. So this is the first chapter. We're living in Egypt. Things are going great, having a good time. And then transition here is
Pharaoh.
years later, there's a new king in town and he doesn't remember Joseph. And he says, behold, the people of Israel are too many, too mighty. What's the best way to deal with them?
Kill them.
Slave them.
Set taskmasters over them, and they will build. And for those of you who are coming to the Ollie course, I'm going to be speaking about the Exodus. Pithom and Ramses are the cities they are building while they're slaves. So this is the story of anything that comes before Moses. It is the transition before Moses. Because next we have two of the greatest heroes in Judaism. And who are they?
Moses and Aaron?
Before Moses and Aaron,
Oh.
the Hebrew midwives.
Ah.
This is all before Moses and Aaron. And the king spoke to the Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Puah, and told them to kill who? Kill
The
any
sons.
sons. Now, we'll talk about this in Ollie. When it says Hebrew midwives, we don't know what that means. It can mean two things. One, it can mean they are Hebrews themselves who are midwives, or Egyptian midwives to the Hebrews. Either way. And what do they say? Well, the Hebrew women are not as Egyptian, for they lively and are delivered. Okay, before we get there. And so, after chapter 1 ends, and Pharaoh charged those people, saying, every son that is born you shall cast in the river, and every daughter shall stay alive. That is chapter 1, Karen.
Do they know, is there, it seems to me I've heard that one of the Ramesses was the pharaoh, they believe. Have they?
There is no evidence one way or
Okay.
the other. The only evidence of the name of Pharaoh, and don't give this away in the Ollie course,
Okay.
is this. They're building the city Ramses, which is a hint that maybe the king was Ramses. It doesn't say Pharaoh Ramses, it says
Right.
Pharaoh. We don't know who the Pharaoh was, and we'll discuss some of the options.
We don't know the city either.
The city where they're living, no, we don't know exactly.
No, but I mean the cities they built.
Yeah, we don't put them in Ramses. Oh, where they are, yes, there's a
Yeah.
general idea where they are.
Having been to Egypt, I remember looking at all these amazing sites and wondering which ones were built by the Hebrew slaves.
Yes, that we have no proof of.
Yeah.
We have an idea where they are, but we have no outside proof of anything. So that's a good question. So then, what do? We go to chapter 2. So anything in Genesis is all these pre-Moses stories. We know chapter 1 of Exodus is pre-Moses. So where does Moses come into play? When do we get to meet this character? The very beginning of chapter 2. So Moses begins in chapter 2. How do we know what tribe he's from? House of Levi. Took a wife and a daughter, and the woman conceived and bore a son. And she hid him 3 months. And when she no longer could hide him, what did she do with this baby, this precious baby? Something unthinkable, something only a desperate woman would do, and that was she put him in an ark. She put it in the river, and the sister watched. And then who comes down to see this baby? The daughter of Pharaoh. And she had compassion. She knew he's a Hebrew. And what does she do to follow orders? Does she have the baby thrown into the river? No, because she is Pharaoh's daughter. She probably has a little extra, if the daughter of a god says we're going to keep this baby, they're going to keep this baby. Take this child away and nurse it for me. And the child grew, and she brought him into Pharaoh's daughter and became her son. So that is the story of Moses in its beginnings. So we call it the 5 books of Moses, but what do we know? That is not entirely correct, because Moses is not in the first book at all, and he's not in the first chapter of the second book. But after this, the entire story of the Bible, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are all about who? Who is the lead character? And those four books,
Moses.
it's
Moses.
all about Moses. So anything about Moses is going to be chapter 2 of Exodus to the very end of Deuteronomy. And what happens at the end of Deuteronomy?
It's off.
This is not the end of Deuteronomy. Sorry, I'm in the wrong book. I'm
This
still.
dies. I mean, that's,
The end
yeah.
of Deuteronomy is, and Moses was, so, this,
120 years old and he died.
died. Yeah.
okay,
His eye was not
Moses
down,
was
nor his natural
120
face.
years old when he died. So he is the main character all the way through, because even though he dies, we still talk about them weeping for him. And there's never arisen another prophet like since Moses, whom God knew face to face, and all the wonders. And so all the way to the very end, the last is, and there never arose a prophet. Oops. Let me do my
Israel like unto Moses.
Okay, well, let me do my annotation. And there never rose a prophet like Moses who knew God face to face, and all the signs and wonders that God showed to him before Pharaoh, and the mighty hand, the great terror which Moses brought on the side of Israel. The end, the very end, the last verse of Deuteronomy is the death of Moses. So that's how you know to find stuff in the Torah. If it's Abraham, you're going to Genesis. If it's Moses, you're going to the last 4 books. If you want the death of Moses, you go to the end of Deuteronomy. If you want the death of Joseph, you go to the end of Genesis. Now, that's just a basic synopsis, but if you go now to the very next book.
Question.
Yes, Michael.
It says that the Israelites mourned for 30 days for Moses. Is that how we came to have Shaloshim when,
Absolutely.
a close relative dies?
Very, very most likely, yes. That is most likely why we have the Shloshim, the 30 days of mourning, is because of Moses right here. 30 days. There you go. Good catch. Way of honoring, because if you honor somebody for 30 days, you're honoring them like we honored Moses, which is a really nice way of honoring somebody. Now, any other questions? I only have some of you on the screen because I can't fit everybody. All right, so let's go to, we finished the Torah. But even though we finished the Torah, the very next line in the Bible is another transition. It is still talking about Moses. Now came after the death of Moses. Great, complete. I mean, it goes from the last verse in Deuteronomy, goes straight into the first verse of Joshua. However, it was decided that the first 5 books would be the most important, even though it's very likely that Joshua and the end of Deuteronomy may have been written similar time period. And it says here, we already know who's taking his place because it's been told to us that Joshua is now in charge. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore rise, go over the Jordan, and all the people of children will follow you.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Where did Aaron come in?
Aaron
Question.
comes in
Exodus.
Exodus. So Aaron comes in, I don't remember the exact, let me look that up with the exact passage. Sorry, I should know this, but I don't. It's in Exodus. It's as he's coming out, Exodus 4. All right, thank you. 4:14. All right. So I'll find that. So Exodus 4:14. Sorry again that I did not know that offhand, but I should have, but I didn't. All right,
Okay.
4:14. And the anger of Lord was kindled, and he said, "Is there not Aaron, thy brother, the Levite? I know he can speak well." So now we know he has a brother. There is a theory that Aaron never existed, that he was added in later. As you say, and God spoke to Moses saying, but sometimes it says, and God spoke to Moses and Aaron saying. So, but that's a debate. So now we go to Deuteronomy, Judges, Joshua, and we have Joshua, who is now every place that your foot goes upon, I have given to you as I spoke to Moses. And now be strong and courageous, which by Moses commanded thee. Still referencing Moses, as we will continue to do throughout the Bible. But now, who is fully in charge of the Israelites? It is Joshua, the warrior. And he's going to take them in more of a warrior type campaign into Israel. And that is what the book of Joshua is. So, and that will continue through Judges. So,
Rabbi,
yes.
one other quick question. If Moses was so well thought of, yet he was not allowed to go into Israel.
Yeah, and that's an amazing piece to this story that really helps set an essential trend for us that really divides us from the rest of the world probably at the time. Because in other literature of the time and other people's views, your hero is a hero, period. You know, the hero can often do no wrong. And in Judaism, it says even the hero fades and can face consequences. And Moses, the greatest hero, is not allowed to reach his heart's desire, even though he is Moses. It also sets a precedent for a God-like human being. Moses is not a god. His children are not gods. It is not the blood of Moses that becomes so important because his children disappear from the scene and barely even have parts in the whole story. So it's really about the people. The people are just as important as Moses. We're all equal in God's eyes. And as we see throughout the Bible, whenever we find amazing characters, Jewish characters, most of the time we concentrate on their faults as opposed to their successes. It's really about, and that's what we see here.
Rabbi,
Stuart.
it strikes me, Moses wasn't allowed to go into the land of Israel, but at that same time, we're told that nobody knows where Moses is buried. Largely, commentary says anyway, show that Moses could not be deified. The spot where he's buried could not be deified. I wonder if not allowing Moses to go into Israel was part of the same kind of idea, that the fact that Moses wasn't allowed this transition says that Moses could not have been a god, and those two combine to strengthen the idea of monotheism.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely what happened. Moses was not buried in Israel. They didn't want his site to be a pilgrimage site. They didn't want him to be deified. And so his burial place is hidden. And what do they want? What site becomes the central? Jerusalem. Now, feedback some places. Sorry, guys. The central place people want to worship is Jerusalem, which is not. That makes sense.
It's his end.
Yeah.
Is it my end? Put everybody on mute for the second and see if it's me. I don't think it's me then. All right, so it could be anybody's. So the burial site of Moses is somewhere in Jordan. But what we know is we started praying in a place called Jerusalem, which is not the birthplace or burial place. It's not based upon, it is the burial place, but it's not based upon. Like in Christianity, Israel is holy because of Jesus being born there. In Islam, it's holy because Muhammad was there. In Judaism, Israel is holy because it is just holy. And so that is why there's the place we consider holy is not a burial place of anybody. It's Jerusalem, and that becomes the center of the Jewish world. For a variety of reasons, we can look at it politically or religiously. You could also say if this was written after the foundation of the city of Jerusalem, they wrote it with the intent of making the Bible centered on Jerusalem, showing that the Bible had no reason to make Israel holy beyond it being holy. But you're right, Moses, his children play no part, and he's buried somewhere in Jordan, and we don't know exactly where. And so after that, we have the books of Joshua and Judges, which are basically books about wars. The book of Joshua is taking Israel. The book of Judges is our attempts to fight off the Canaanite tribes. And when we're successful, we struggle with this new group called the Philistines. And we are unable to fight them off as individual tribes. So the book of Judges is about individual tribes fighting off Canaanites. The end of the Judges is about how the individual tribes cannot fight off this group called the Philistines. And the Philistines were a little bit more powerful than any of the Canaanite tribes. They had iron, first of all, and they were much better fighters and much better in terms of organization. And so what we see is the book of Samuel is the start of the kingship, the need for united tribes to fight off the Philistines. And in this story of Samuel, we learn first about Samuel, and then we go into his reluctance to anoint a king. And that's the book of Samuel and the two books of Samuel, 2 books of Kings are these stories about these two. Let's see here. So when we get here, the books of Samuel and Kings, 2 books, are about the kingship. But most importantly, what does it teach us about the kingship in these 4 books? What is the theme of the 4 books? It's all about kings. The theme is kings are not good. We need to find a different way. Samuel does not want a king. He is basically forced into anointing first Saul and David. He doesn't really want them. He doesn't want them at all. He's actually dead by the time David's anointed, but he knows David's going to be king. And it's about how kings don't do what they're supposed to do, and how being king can make you full of yourself and that you will take advantages in ways you shouldn't. You put yourself above the rest and how this is wrong. All the kings, except for 4, are considered terrible. And the 4 are considered good. The 2 most important ones, David and David and Solomon, make a lot of mistakes. Kings is about there has to be a better way. Or you can view it as saying, kings make a lot of mistakes. You need to have somebody watching over them. You can't have a singular person in charge of everything. That is a mistake. That is going to lead only one place, and that is calamity. And so if you're going to have a king, you have to have something to offset the king, to not let him become a feral character, not a God king, not all powerful. You need to have first, somebody else has to be in charge of the religion. Who is that?
Priest.
The priest. And you need somebody to watch over both of these and be accountable to nobody. And that is
Yeah.
the prophet. This is all about how they keep each other in check. The prophet cannot be any part of society. He's an outsider completely, as we've talked about. He has to be able to go to the king, to the priest, and chastise them for making mistakes, willing to die. He can't be beholden to money or to people. He can't have friends. He's basically just an outsider who does what is right. Doesn't worry about it. So it also teaches us that the kingship is limited because the line of David ends as kings in the book of 2 Kings. We hear one 50 years later, 50 to 70 years later, 80 years later, we hear about a descendant of David, but that's it. He's not king anymore. So the king will eventually die out. And so that leaves you with the priest and the prophet, the religion and the person telling you to behave. But as we see in Jewish history, which one is going to end? Priest will eventually end, and prophecy will eventually end. It teaches us that we have to go out on our own and continue to do it ourselves. That these prophets and kings and priests play their parts, but eventually we have to do it ourselves. And that's what this section is about. The kings die off, we don't see them anymore. Then Malachi will be the last, Josiah will be the last king, or actually his children, Joachim will be one. Malachi will be the last prophet. And then after the destruction of temple, the priests will lose their power. Any questions or thoughts? It's really such a unique book, Stuart, and you're on mute.
Okay, thank you. Wasn't it at this period also that the 12 tribes essentially disappear? And from this point on, we no longer hear about the 12 tribes, but we hear about the Jews having taken the name from Judah in general and as a single, I'll call it unified body, as unified as any body politic ever is.
Yes, and let me show you when this happens. 1 second, I'm going to show you how this happens. We were going to talk about this later. We can continue, but, oops, it's the wrong one.
We can let it go for later.
No, that's a good question. We'll end with that question. Perfect. So, tribal Judaism is something that is meant to end. Saul becomes king circa 1034. These are all guesses. and he is from the tribe of Ben, and he's not, it doesn't, he's having trouble uniting the tribes. So who takes over? David from the most powerful tribe of Judah. And he unites the tribes, but they still stay tribal. David is king over the tribes because Judah is the most powerful tribe. But what happens is in 922, 10 of the tribes rebel against David's descendant, and they start the northern kingdom of Israel. So 10 tribes are in the north, 2 in the south, and then you've got the tribe of Levi who is everywhere. So it's still tribal Judaism till 922. We know that. In 722, the tribes are destroyed, and the northern kingdom is destroyed, and the leftovers of the tribes come down, and probably some of them move into Judah. And this is the beginning of the end of tribal Judaism. We don't know exactly what happens. We know that the 10 tribes are destroyed in 722. They become the 10 lost tribes. Some of them probably got sent to Assyria, and some of them came down to Judah and meshed. So the tribal Judaism could have ended in 722. In this time period, as everybody becomes part of the same. But what also we see is that later on, a guy named Ezekiel mentions that tribal Judaism doesn't work anymore, or tribal Judaism ended, is not working. So right around here, in this period, we see Ezekiel talking about how tribal Judaism ended and Jews should be just one group.
I'm sorry.
So does that mean tribal Judaism ended years ago, or is Ezekiel saying there's still tribal Judaism, we need to end it? So some would say tribal Judaism ended right here. Some would say it ended sometime in here. We don't know. So it's either around 700s, 600s, or mid 500s.
Okay.
So that is essential for us to know, because what does it teach us? It teaches if tribal Judaism ended sometime in the 6th century BCE, it means that nobody living
Well, I'm coming, Ron.
will know what tribe they're from unless you're from what tribe?
Baby.
Unless you're from the tribe of Levites, tribe of Levi, and you're a Levite, nobody knows which tribe they're from. It's impossible to know which tribe. Unless you can prove you're a descendant of the king. If you're the Messiah, you're supposed to be from the tribe of Judah. But we have no evidence of any tribal allegiances since a guy named Zerubbabel, who was mentioned and then disappeared sometime at the end of the 6th century as a line of David. So he was in the tribe of Judah. So for 2,500 years, we can't find our tribe unless you're the tribe of Levi, because Levi was the priest. They were everywhere. They were still doing the temple stuff. So again, as I mentioned probably last Saturday, I'll mention again, I am a Levite. Anybody else here a Levite or a Cohen? I am a Levite, one of the lower priests. And how do I know I'm a Levite? There's only one way to know.
Your father told you, right?
Exactly. My daddy said I was a Levite. Didn't make a big deal to him. The same thing with a Cohen. Now they say they found a Cohen gene. That may be true, but that's still only the tribe of Levi. So tribal Judaism ended maybe in the 700s, maybe in the 500s, but certainly we haven't had any tribal Judaism in over 2,000 years. So when somebody says I'm from the tribe of Issachar, they'll usually say, a better tribe like Ephraim or something. You can listen to them, but the truth is, it's not possible to know. Karen.
I've often wondered this with centuries and centuries of marriages, just even within Judaism. By now, you would think we would all be descended from.
That's an
The-
excellent point.
I never could figure out, how people know.
Most likely, we have a hodgepodge of all the tribes in us, if we're
Right.
even go back that far. I mean, we can trace our roots to Eastern Europe,
Right.
but that is as far as anybody really can get. There's a few exceptions, but most of us can only go back a few years, maybe 100 years, some of us 400 or 500 years, but nobody can go back 2,000 years. We have no
Right.
idea what blood we have in us. But you're right, there's a good chance that we have some of the tribes in us, and there's a good chance we have some non-Jewish blood in us as well, although people can convert. But we don't know. It's impossible to know. What is very likely is that nobody is 100% from a tribe. And there's a very good chance that 100% of us we're not 100% Jewish descended from those Israelites, because Jews have gone throughout the world. People converted. so
Rabbi, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Have you ever I wondered if anyone's done their DNA, because mine showed that I was 99 point something% Ashkenazi Jewish. So
And now that's an excellent point. If you're 99.9% Ashkenazic Jewish, you can only go back at the most 1,000 years or less, maybe 900, 800 years. That's far, but that's not all the way back to the Bible times, which is several thousand years. You can go to, if you're an Ashkenazic Jew, maybe you lived in this area, you can be a Sephardic Jew living in this area, but you can't, it doesn't say tribe, and it doesn't say where you come from before that. So
right.
there may be ways to figure that out. That's the bell to go. Yes, we'll do. And one more question. And Stuart, would you take yourself off mute? I put everybody on mute because of the thing. We'll finish with this.
I think there really has to be almost two views of the piece of history that you gave from David. You gave what was going on in a sense, a secular way. But at the same time, we had a religious, philosophical, spiritual thing going on, because we had going away a relationship we had going away intermediaries between God and the Jewish people. Kings no longer had a special place. The idea of what do they call it? Divine
Destiny,
rights.
rights.
By divine right has disappeared. The prophets have disappeared, so you don't have that connection. And what's left is the connection of the individual Jewish person directly to God. And before this period, we really never had that. There was always an intermediary.
Yeah, and the priest often served as this, but again,
But that disappeared.
Yeah, the idea was, from a Jewish perspective, the priest was necessary because of us, not because of God.
Priest was necessary because we didn't know how to sacrifice.
We didn't, everybody else, you're kind of taking this as a way for us to move into our relationship with God. So we needed the priest at first to be this intermediary, and the priest just stayed a long time, probably longer than he should have. But again, it's very hard to know because we have the Bible, and knowing what people did from day to day and their relationship with God and the priest is just really difficult because you don't have a camera that was viewing the day-to-day life of somebody in the 5th century or 4th century BCE. We only know what we see in the Bible and what they can find from archaeological evidence, and it's still limiting. So yes, the priest was the intermediary between us and God, but how did it work beyond the sacrifices is hard to know.
Mhm.
So
We had
these,
no king, no priest, no prophet. If you wanted to commune with God, became a do-it-yourself project.
I think that's what the Bible's teaching us, that it's selectively choosing people to assist us, but having those people disappear so we don't need them forever. And I think society has followed that in many ways. A lot of countries went away from this dictatorship, including our country, but some countries kept it. So it shows there's different ways to evolve. But what we'll do next week is we'll continue to talk a little bit about the Bible. We'll talk a little bit about the prophets and some of the more specific stuff, and then we'll get into writings and talk about some of those characters. If there's particular books that you want us to concentrate on, just let me know. And if anybody wants to talk about the book of Daniel, talk about Proverbs, just let me know and we can concentrate on the entire book. Because we can spend a long time on individual books, or we can do it more in general things, whatever you guys want. So this is awesome. 2025 is the year of the Tanakh. Although that's not really true because we've had it for a long time, but So any other questions before we leave? Now, just to let you know, this weekend we are celebrating Lenny Tishberg's bar mitzvah. Everybody's obviously invited. So that will be Saturday morning. It should be a lot of fun. And we know it'll be a great day. It's not that often that we do a second bar mitzvah of somebody who is turning 83. On the 24th, the 17th, we have Rockin' Shabbat, and that Friday night. I know it's sometimes hard to come on a Friday night, but if you're interested. And then, of course, we have a variety of other things. The annual meeting is at 3 o'clock on the 26th. Of course, all members are invited to that. And we've got a lot of other things coming up. And I will also be teaching at Ollie at some time about the Exodus from Egypt. So if anybody can't make that, I'm happy to just do the same lesson for you guys, talking about what we know of from the Exodus of Egypt and what we don't. All right. So as always, you guys are amazing. Next week, we'll continue the Bible. Please email me if you have specific things, and we'll turn to that. Thank you for everybody joining us also on YouTube, as we had a great time with all of you. And again, we want to wish everybody the best. And as we go, have everybody say goodbye. So thank you, Michael and Lou and Karen and Arlene and Flossie and Ron and David and Arnold and Stuart for joining us on Zoom, and everybody else for joining us on YouTube. And we will see you next week on the Wednesday class that shall not be named. So
Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, bye-bye.